So, last time we talked about, pulling all the premises that the author used to support this conclusion. We should all use phones more instead of apps and other technology. That seems to be what he's arguing for trying to do, so that, I argued was the best take on the conclusion here. And then we tried to fit the pieces together to give us, all the premises to write it all out, Both the premises he mentions, which are quite a lot, it's only 7 pages, but still 7 pages is not nothing, and also the ones he seems to assume. So we got a pretty long argument, right? 17 premises and 1 objection. And you might be looking at this thinking, oh my God, how could we ever, diagram this? Well, it's going to be a little complicated, but it's not impossible. So we'll just work our way down. And again, as I said, step by step, piece by piece, People will often call this the method of analysis. It's big, at least. It's big in philosophy generally, but especially philosophy as it's done in the US and Great Britain. Break a problem into small pieces, solve those problems, If you solve all the small problems you've broken the bigger problem into, you solve the bigger problem, right? I think engineers and programmers often do this too. So, we want to diagram all this. Let's break this into smaller pieces. And we'll just start at the very top of the argument and work our way down. So, almost everyone of every age knows how to place a phone call. Very young and very old people don't know how to use apps and similar technology. Well, that gets us 3. So more people know how to use telephones than apps and other technology. And so we could diagram this 1 and 2 dependent support for 3. 3 goes straight to our conclusion. But we might ask ourselves if that's the best way to think of this, right? Look at 4, 5, and 6. Simple voice calls are accessible to the roughly 1 in 5 Americans who do not own a smartphone. Well, fewer than 1 in 5 people does not have access to phone calls. I think 4 and 5, they support 6. Think about 1, 2, 3. More people know how to use apps than other, telephones and apps and other technologies. That also seems to support 6. So, I think all of this, probably the best way to look at this isn't, going straight from 3 to the conclusion, but something like this. 1 and 2 together support 3. More people know how to use phones than apps and other technology. 3 provides some support for 6. Voice calls are more accessible than smartphones, than apps that rely on smartphones. But 4 and 5, more people have access to phones than, phones that make voice calls than smartphones. That also supports 6, so we have converging support for 6. I haven't put it in yet, but 6 is going to go straight to our conclusion, right? All right. So, I'm just going to gray out premises as we fill them in. One thing you guys should notice, we've already made some pretty big progress here, right? We are now 1/3 of the way through this giant argument. Well, let's look at 7, 8, 9. 7, the Associated Press has used phones to collect election results for many years. They wouldn't use phones to collect election results if they hadn't proven reliable, so a telephone system is also reliable. All that supports 9. Reliable in the sense, you can use it. 10 can't be easily hacked. Apps and technology can be hacked. Maybe that could support being reliable, but it seems like that's more logical to say it supports this other independent premise. It's just harder to hack them than it is other technology. So I think 7, 8, and 9 form their own independent bit of the argument. 7 and 8 together get you 9. 9 is going to be another premise that supports our conclusion. Well, now we are more than halfway through, right? We are starting to make real progress here, just taking this piece by piece again, right? Telephone communication cannot be easily hacked. Apps and other technology can be easily hacked. So it is harder to hack telephone communication than apps and other technology. 12 seems like it leads pretty directly to the conclusion. You know, the other stuff here about information from Google not being reliable, none of that seems to hook up with 12 or anything. So here we have another bit that's kind of self-contained. 10 and 11 support 12. 12 is going to be, along with 6 and 9, more support for our final conclusion. We're having all these sub-arguments to get us premises that will lead to our conclusion, right? And now look, we're 2/3 of the way through. Look at all the stuff that's grayed out here. We've got most of the argument down, right? 13, 14, 15. Information derived from Google and others programs about business hours often reliable. We can get reliable information about business hours via phone conversations. Well, 13 and 14 look like they support 15. More quickly and reliable using phones rather than apps. So 13, 14 together support 15. And finally, in the end, 15 is going to be, along with these others, one that leads down to our conclusion. (16, 17). Telephones encourage us to develop the habit of talking to strangers. Encouraging the habit of talking to strangers is good for democracy. You know, as I said, we could like look at there being maybe another missing premise here. We could argue about it. I didn't fill it in. So 16 and 17 together are themselves, the way I've set this up, going to lead to our conclusion. Now we have pretty much everything, right? None of these statements, 6, 9, 12, 15, or 16 plus 17, none of them seem to rely on each other. They all seem to be independent reasons for this one big conclusion. You know, they're more accessible. Well, that doesn't really relate to them being more reliable, 6 and 9. And, you know, they're more accessible, they're more reliable. Don't seem to hook in with them being harder to hack. None of that seems to relate to 15. More quickly and reliably, we can access information. So these are all independent support for this final conclusion. All right. So this is big. This is kind of unwieldy. You'll notice Lavin talks about there being different levels in argument diagrams. This one has 3 different levels. 4 if you count the conclusion. This is pretty complex, right? Well, we left out one thing, right? The objection: you only prefer telephones because you are old and fear unfamiliar technology. Well, now we have that, right? You know, I'm not sure what this objection... I'm a little on the fence about whether I should even put this in as objection. If it is an objection, I'm not sure what it's an objection to. But it seems as much as anything an objection to the conclusion, so we'll put it there, right? Well, now, what's the point of all this, right? You know, professors often, I think, run along with little exercises. Oh, we can do this thing. Let me teach you how to do it. And you're like, okay, well, you, Mr. Professor, are obviously really jazzed that you know how to do this. Why is this useful? Well, 2 reasons. And they both relate back to evaluating the strength of the argument. Think back to the beginning here, right? Look at the claims that the guy makes, especially the ones he assumes. Almost everyone of every age knows how to place a phone call. Is that true? Yeah, it seems like it's true, right? Very young and very old people do not know how to use apps and similar technology. That also seems very plausible. It seems true, right? Your 89-year-old grandmother, there's a good chance she doesn't know how to use an Apple smartphone. My grandparents are dead, but my wife's grandmother certainly does not know how to use, a smartphone or apps. She very much knows how to use um, a voice phone to make a voice call. Simple voice calls are accessible to roughly 1 in 5 Americans who do not own a smartphone. More people, 5, have access to voice calls. This also seems plausible. It almost seems like by definition, right? Everybody who has a smartphone can make a voice call. There are people who have landlines who don't have smartphones. They can also make voice calls. This also seems like a very, very plausible premise. Also, the Associated Press uses phones to collect election results. They've done that for many years. That doesn't seem like it's obviously true, but he gives us a link for it. He gives us some evidence, right? So we can accept that premise. The Associated Press wouldn't use phones unless they had proven reliable. That also seems true. Look, they're the major reporting agency. They rely on things. They want to get the news in time. They want the news to be accurate. If something wasn't reliable, they wouldn't use it. That seems pretty obviously true. Telephone communication cannot be easily hacked. Well, not in the way apps can, certainly, right? You can't steal information that way. Apps and other technology apps and other technology can be easily hacked. Of all the premises, 10 and 11, I'm a little unsure about, but they don't seem obviously wrong, right? I'm not so sure apps can be easily hacked, right? I mean, I can't do it. It's not like boiling an egg. You can't do it in 20 minutes training. But, it doesn't obviously wrong either. Information derived from Google and other programs about business hours is often unreliable. Oh my goodness, yes, if you haven't run into this, you will eventually, right? Google tells you it's still open and it's closed for a holiday, right? That has happened to me 2 or 3 times. Or Google gives you the hours for summer. Lo and behold, it's, the week after Labor Day. They now close 2 hours sooner. Sometimes Google doesn't even warn you, right? He talks about when you have the holiday hours. Sometimes it doesn't even warn you. Going on Google is a not great way to get businesses hours. So, we can get reliable information from business hours via telephone conversations. Yeah, right? You call up a business, somebody picks up, they will tell you the hours. If they don't pick up, if you're wondering if they're closed, that's generally pretty good information they're closed, right? So it does seem to me, he's probably right about this, easier to get reliable information about business hours by just picking up a phone rather than Googling and wondering about it. Telephones encourage us to develop the habit of talking to strangers. Encouraging the habit of talking to strangers is good for democracy. I'm not so sure about these, but not crazy either. So, almost all of these premises are either obviously true or they're at the very least plausible. The only ones I would push back on are, 11, 10, 11, 12, and 16 and 17. The others seem to be obviously true. Well, then what do we do with this, right? Well, look at the structure of this argument. I said, well, 10, 11, 12. I'm not sure they're wrong, right? They just seem a little dubious to me. But, 10, 11, 12 look a little dubious to me, as do 16 and 17. Well, imagine we reject that. We still have a lot of premises providing support for this conclusion. Remember, it uses this independent support. The argument could survive if we reject these sets of premises. We still have all these other things supporting it, right? Phone system is reliable. Phone system is more accessible than apps. Better way to access information. So, look, I'm not even sure that these premises are false, but even if we push back on them, if we were to reject them, the argument would still work because there's still a lot here that provides support for this conclusion. And what kind of conclusion is this? One useful way to think of an argument is, it bears the weight of the conclusion. Well, the heavier or the more ambitious the conclusion is, the better your argument needs to be, both in structure and in whether the premises are true. Well, this isn't a completely trivial premise, but the guy's saying you should pick up the phone and use that sometimes when you use an app. He's not saying go out and smash your cell phone now, or never use a computer, or phones work for every single thing, right? So I think when we look at the diagramming, we see that this is a very, very solid argument. Lots of premises offering independent support for a conclusion that's not crazy. He gives us good reason to think this is true. Mind you, I might be biased. My wife always never wants to call anywhere, and it drives me crazy. Even places that are just terrible about processing online orders for pickup. She'll put the online order in, you'll go in, you'll see the dude's just lost the little slip. Anyway, I might be overly sympathetic because I buy what this guy says to start with, but when you do look at it, both in whether the premises are true and the different ways the premises support the conclusion, this is a very, very solid argument. It almost certainly establishes its conclusion. I think we should probably use telephones more than most of us, are in the habit of doing. So hopefully this whole exercise of distilling and diagramming the argument, give you a better idea of how the argument works, but also allow you to assess a bit more, is this or isn't it a strong argument? And I think, diagramming this one, we can see, well, it actually is a pretty strong argument. It probably does give us pretty compelling reasons to accept its conclusion.